In 1905, Albert Lasker, described by his friend Ben Sonnenberg as an advertising man carved out of the side of a mountain, was sitting in his office in Chicago when a messenger brought in a note from a stranger. It read, "I am downstairs in the saloon. I can tell you what advertising is. I know you don't know. If you wish to know, send the word 'yes' down by the bellboy." Signed, John E. Kennedy. This was the first appearance on the advertising scene of this remarkable man. Tall, strikingly handsome, and an ex-member of the Canadian Mounted Police, he was the first great advertising theorist. Most of his theories, set down by Lasker years later, are still as fresh and glistening as new paint on the wall. Kennedy's first question to Lasker was, "Do you know what advertising is?" "Yes," said Lasker. "I think I do. Advertising is news about a product." "No," said Kennedy. "News is merely a technique of presentation. Advertising is salesmanship in print. The definition sounds primitive today, but at that time it was revolutionary." Some men had confused advertising, as they still do today, with great writing. Others were devoting their lives to finding clever slogans. Still others were content with pictures of the product. One big firm defined advertising simply as keeping your name before the public. Another stated that it was spending your money in the right papers, but did not specify spending the money in what way. Another proclaimed keeping everlastingly at it brings success, but did not say keeping at what. Unfortunately, Kennedy's old and classic definition is not precise enough today. Too many advertising writers who never sold anything have their own definitions of salesmanship. It is time for a new definition in terms of reality in advertising. We think it would be advertising is the art of getting a unique selling proposition into the heads of the most people at the lowest possible cost. If this is true, the problem of the advertising man begins to define itself, and in a very clear sequence. First is the creation of the right message. Here actually is the ultimate in advertising originality. For once achieved, 100 men might write 100 different advertisements, and each might be tremendously successful. Second, it is the writing of the advertisement so that it projects this message to the maximum number of people. Now we see the true limits of originality. We see that originality cannot be wild and free and unfettered. It must, within the limits of advertising functionalism, restrict itself. No longer can the copywriter, like Tennyson's Lady of Shalott, view life through his own magic mirror. No longer can he live in that state the saints call Innigkeit, or inwardness. For him, no longer, can private planets shine in some solipsist universe where his delusions can be treated as reality. He must make his imagination function under the strict discipline of attaining a commercial goal. Such discipline should hardly be bitter medicine. Even Beethoven's Titanic hammer strokes were based on the discipline of harmony. It may even be possible, within the confines of unpleasant practicality, to have beautiful pictures and colored clouds of soaring words. But we hear the voice from the wings. There are unfortunately no buts. An advertisement is an instrument of commerce, and like a diesel motor, it must be judged on whether it performs what it was designed to do. Is a wristbone unoriginal or uncreative? Is an ear? Or are they beautifully functional, slim, like a needle, or ovoid, like an egg, shaped the way they are because they have a specific function to perform? Does the tread of a tractor cry for the addition of non-essentials? The curve of a spring? A light bulb? A radar antenna? We do not think so. Our researches lead us to the conclusion that there are two extremes in advertising. Advertising designed as art, without reference to its business function. Advertising designed for its business function, which may not be considered by some critics to be a work of art. The first should be viewed with suspicion since it usually obscures the message. The second should be judged by its results rather than by critics who are concerned with aesthetics rather than with profits. I would like to add a wry comment. Only occasionally are great salesmen things of beauty. They do not carry paintings by Picasso in their hands, speak in rhyme or sing, dance, and play the flute. They are usually very earnest men who speak convincingly and with knowledge about why their product is better. One of advertising's greatest theories can be summed up in the question, what is the best way to sow the seeds? The seed, of course, is the advertisement. Within it, fruitful and ready to germinate, is the U.S.P, Do we sow these seeds profusely and heavily over a few acres, or do we scatter them over a much larger area of ground? Here is a key principle of reality in advertising, yet it is often practiced wrongly by many top agency men, veterans of decades of campaigns. They write powerful advertisements, they spend millions of dollars on them, and then they wonder if they look into penetration at all, why the results are less than fruitful. Put precisely, the question is it better to reach a smaller audience yet reach it more times? Or is it better to reach a bigger audience, yet reach it less often? To take an extreme example, an advertiser might be able to spend all his funds in 2 great magazines and 1 television show. In this way, he might reach 30 million people, by and large the same people, an average of 3 times a week. Or might it be wiser to reach 90 million people, say, once a week? The answer, of course, is by dispersion. Try to reach more homes, not the same homes. Try to reach more people, not the same people. In other words, reach your audience less often, but make it as large an audience as you can. It should be pointed out that this theory applies only to mass consumption products. It would be foolish to buy dispersion for, say, a farm tractor, or any product that appeals only to a select audience. But for products like soaps or cigarettes, automobiles, food, or insurance, dispersion is a necessity. What led us to specialize in dispersion, incidentally, is in itself an interesting story. Back in the early 1940s, we observed that certain brands were spurting ahead in sales. We began to analyze their activities to see whether or not some principle, unknown to us, might not be at work. Indeed, there was. We discovered that these brands were buying non-network spots or adding them to their other media. This was puzzling, for these spots were not only costly, but they all fell in the daytime. What is more, they were broadcast between programs, thus missing out on a sacred fetish of many advertising men, the consumer's alleged loyalty to the show. With the help of the A.C. Nielsen Company, we began to explore this puzzle. We took an average daytime radio spot list and compared it to an average 15-minute, 5 times a week show. We discovered that we reached twice as many people as the top-rated daytime show. We discovered that we reached even more homes than the biggest evening show then on the air. And this happened despite the ratings of the spots, for the spots that we analyzed were not better than average. What had happened was that these spots were dispersing the message, scattering the message, sowing the seeds much more widely, reaching a much larger audience, although not as many times. Further analysis revealed that this principle did not depend on spots. An advertiser, if he had more than one product to advertise, could do the same thing with shows. He could buy different shows of different types and different times on different networks or stations, appealing to different audiences. Then he could cross-rough his commercials, i.e., use his shows as spot carriers. The results would be golden. Penetration would mount up, and up. Sales would spurt ahead. The ideal dispersion, of course, would be to reach 100% of the people, and then repeat with as much frequency as the budget will permit. There is no such buy. But until an advertiser can reach maximum audience, 80% to 90%, he must keep reaching out for more and more different people. Then, and only then, should he begin to add frequency. Keep in mind that this has nothing to do with the size of the budget, nor does it dictate the choice of media, for it will work equally well in magazines, in newspapers, or in broadcast. One way, the advertiser utilizes his dollars to the maximum. The other way, he wastes his money. Many great advertisers do not know this. For example, one of America's largest agencies tells its clients, "Sell in depth. Take a smaller audience and hit them over and over and over again." Another agency took the entire budget of a big brand and spent it all in a single weekly magazine. Watch your television screen. Soon you will find an advertiser who devotes an entire show to a single product. You will find 3 commercials on 1/2 hour for the same brand. This advertiser would double his audience and double his penetration if he were to put one commercial on 3 different shows. Notice that we said double his penetration. This leads to a natural question. Does the principle of dispersion lead to higher penetration? The answer is yes. We have measured dispersion and checked it against national penetration, and while the correlation is not perfect, there is an amazing similarity. For example, we recently measured 19 brands being handled by Ted Bates and Company. We found that these brands, some with big budgets and some with little budgets, were reaching an average of 37% of all homes. Then we checked the public to see who remembered the advertising message. Here are the results. Audience, 37%. Penetration, 35%. When we subdivided these 19 brands, the figures became even more meaningful. 4 brands reached 16%, 19% penetration. 4 brands reached 26%, 26% penetration. 4 brands reached 32%, 40% penetration. 4 brands reached 48%, 36% penetration. 3 brands reached 70%, 59% penetration. The implication of these figures is obvious. The more homes you reach, the more heads you will get your message into, and the more opportunity you will be giving your copy to make sales for you. However, it does not follow that these figures will work for all kinds of copy. This book has dealt with reality in advertising, and the copy we have measured has been reality copy. It is U.S.P copy, sharply focused, run unchanged, often repetitive, with no distraction video, with strong video behind the U.S.P, and with copy laboratory checks to make sure that no commercials with low copy delivery are going on the air. However, with reality copy, it is possible to calculate dispersion and, with reasonable accuracy, determine what levels of national penetration you can reach. Do not seek for this correlation, however, with show window advertising, and do not seek for it with commercials that emerge from a copy laboratory with a copy delivery of 5%, 10%, or even 30%. Dispersion sounds easy. It is far from easy. The average media department does not have automatically built into it the machinery and wide knowledge which can bring it about. Dispersion is actually a complicated and precise undertaking, a gigantic jigsaw puzzle consisting of thousands and thousands of tiny pieces. Each one must be fitted neatly into place, and this calls not only for a huge media department, but one staffed with specialists in this particular field. Today, when we find a brand that is failing to keep pace with its competitors, we look at its dispersion. A large number of times, far, far too often, this is the error. Meanwhile, somewhere, puzzled men may be wondering why good copy does not always produce good sales. Where now do we stand on our body of theory? A summing up is in order, for we have not only covered many subjects, but we have been forced to put, in little chapters of 2 or 3 pages, some principles that deserve small volumes in themselves. The best way to sum up is to take a typical manufacturer who has been doing everything quite wrong and see how this body of theory changes his entire advertising operation. Let us introduce him. He is a hard-working manufacturer with a relatively new company, spending $1 million a year in advertising. Sales are down, profits are down, and his costs are mounting steadily. He has a good but not exceptional product. He employs 750 people who support, in turn, about 3,000 people. This company is a youngster, an example of free enterprise in the free auction of the market, trying to get ahead. Facing this company, however, are 2 dominant and much stronger competitors. One has 50% of the sales, the other has 35%. They are spending $4 million and $3 million respectively, leaving our manufacturer with only 12.2% of the total advertising dollars and only 15% of the total sales. This is enormous advertising leverage against his brand. However, our manufacturer has not been making conditions any better because he has been practicing, in its fullest implications, unreality sell. He has had no copy measurements of any kind and has been trying to judge his campaigns by sales in a market filled with deals and variables. Even worse, he has changed campaigns steadily. For years, he ran show window advertising. He dabbled in Freudian research. Then he experimented with mood and feeling copy, i.e., pure brand image. Most of his copy fitted what we describe as the tired art of puffery. Convinced, too, that his small budget could make no national impact, he has concentrated on a small audience, ignoring the principle of dispersion. In 10 years, he has switched agencies 4 times, but despite each new campaign, he has watched his sales shrink slowly, year by year. Then he switched to reality sell. A national penetration check turned a blindingly bright, if shocking, searchlight on his copy operation. He discovered that his biggest competitor had a penetration of 36%, the other a penetration of 27%, and his own was less than 10%. What is more, each of his competitors had a fair usage pull, but his own was zero. In other words, the people who knew his advertising bought no more of the product than the people who did not know his advertising. Now, however, he began to go to work. He explored thoroughly the three big roads to Rome. He chose to improve his product on the theory that a gifted product is mightier than a gifted pen. This gave him for the first time a potent U.S.P and strong copy leverage. In addition, it gave him a powerful product comparison and one way outside the deceptive differential. He began to see advertising for the first time as a tool. He applied the principle of copy focus so that his U.S.P began to sing out. He worked hard to make his campaign a philosophy of claim crossed with a philosophy of feeling. Audio was locked to video in his television commercials. Vampire claims were eliminated. Vampire video went out the window. He developed a striking central video to highlight his U.S.P still further, like that burst of heat lightning which makes everything so vivid and clear. Copy laboratory tests not only helped him achieve these objectives, but, in addition, they quickly separated the good from the awful. He emerged with a series of commercials which in the copy laboratory projected his new U.S.P into 80% of the heads. Meanwhile, similar tests showed him that his competitors' commercials had an average registration of only 30%, assuring him of an enormous margin. This margin, however, was to be increased in still another way, for a market test revealed that his new U.S.P had a usage pull of 18%, compared with 9% for one of his competitors and 5% for the other. Simultaneously, a full-scale media study revealed that neither of his competitors was taking advantage of the principle of dispersion. He rapidly overhauled his schedules, cutting down on frequency and reaching out for more and more people. Underlying all this activity was a new and exciting understanding of some of the broader reality principles. He understood now the life expectancy of advertising. He was aware that there was no more room in the box. He knew now that he had spent years chopping down his own trees, and that his past campaigns were but a series of hacked-down saplings. Understanding at last that changing a campaign is like stopping the money, and secure in the knowledge that his new campaign would not wear out, he was now making plans to grow instead a giant of the forest. What an astonishing difference to his company! Almost instantly, his new usage pull began to reflect in his total sales. Penetration began to climb steadily, to 16% the first year, 20% the second year, 26% the third year, 34% the fourth year, 39% the fifth year, and 47% the sixth year. During this time, his competitors, out of worry, went into a not unusual reaction procedure, changing their own campaigns. This lowered their penetration just when they needed to improve it, and this lowering was accentuated by another advertising principle. His competitor's penetration was driven further down as he seized a larger and larger share of the consumer's brain box. The seventh year, his penetration was 60%, and that of his competitors was down to 22% and 18% respectively. His advertising budget, geared to growing sales, was now $3,500,000. And from a very bad third, he was now in second place. Barring accidents and watching the errors his less expert competitors are making, he knows that shortly he will be number one in sales. A mythical case history? No, it happened. And we have seen it happen again and again and again. When this book was being finished, it was read, up to this point, by a distinguished advertising man who had been a specialist for years in the field of automobile advertising. "It is very interesting," he said, nodding his head. "What specialized principles you people have developed in the field of packaged goods. Most of them have very little relation to any other form of advertising." How wrong he was. The principles of communication, or reality in communication, are universal in mass advertising. Show window advertising, copy focus, penetration, usage pull, the multi-million-dollar error, the two faces of advertising, vampire video, the vampire claim, dispersion, the U.S.P, the good and the awful, the law of calculated risk. All the many principles set forth in this book can be applied to almost any type of product. They are above product, actually, and will work equally well for insurance companies, institutional campaigns, banks, ethical drugs, hard goods, soft goods, or gasolines. When I made this reply, my friend shook his head. Well, he said, they do not apply to automobiles. For example, we could never have a U.S.P. You forget that we must sell a constant procession of individual features, and we have a brand new product every year. Well, these principles certainly are not being applied, for most automobile campaigns today are what we call show window advertising, but they can be applied, for they once were applied. I am referring to the great historic automobile campaign for Dodge, run by Walter Chrysler back in the darkest days of the Depression. Chrysler took as his U.S.P the theme of Dodge dependability, the toughness, ruggedness, and economy of this car. Conceived by Sid Schwinn, this campaign was worked out in a series of brilliant and superbly finished advertisements, rich with showmanship, which belong, if one is ever established, in some campaign hall of fame. The first advertisement was a double-page spread. On the left-hand page, the car was shown plunging at high speed through a sandpit, with gravel sheeting up over the hood. On the right-hand page, the car stood, polished and beautiful, on the showroom floor, and the headline streaming underneath was, "Powders her nose in a sandpit. Wins honors at a beauty show." In subsequent advertisements, the car was shown being rolled off cliffs to prove that it could still be driven away under its own power, and to prove that the doors still opened and closed. It was sent smashing through creeks. Elephants were photographed standing on its top to show the strength of the body. Chorus girls, 2 and 3 at a time, were shown hanging from one opened door to prove the strength of the hinges. Dodge dependability, toughness, ruggedness with beauty. This was the U.S.P, although it was never summed up in so many pat words. And as the campaign continued, year after year, model after model was introduced within the framework of this U.S.P, and feature after feature was forcefully made clear. Far better than show window advertising, this campaign continued to build penetration on a great single concept, a U.S.P. And in a time of darkness and panic, when cars were very serious purchases, it rolled up a 154% increase in sales in the first year, moving Dodge from 9th to 4th place. The second year sales took another jump, a rich 70%. So the answer is not that the principles in this book cannot be applied. The answer is that they are not being applied. These principles were learned through packaged goods advertising, and that is good, for packaged goods is a hard school with huge budgets, rough competition, frequent purchases, and low unit costs. Fierce cats prowl this jungle, and the weak and foolish die, often without knowing why, at the waterhole. Darwin's law of survival of the fittest is at work every minute of every day. Mistakes become quickly and hideously apparent. The principles of survival become crystal clear. And these principles apply to toads as well as tigers, to moths as well as mastodons. It is interesting in this connection to note that the Great Chrysler campaign was written by what was then a pure packaged goods agency. Just as these principles worked then for automobiles, so they can be made to work for appliances, soft goods, gasolines, insurance companies, or even the loftiest and most tenuous of institutional campaigns. All one has to do is apply them. A myth, Arnold Toynbee once remarked, is a curious animal, for it feeds upon itself, and the more it eats, the larger it grows. A giant of the species now crouches above Madison Avenue. It is swollen already to monstrous proportions, and every day its dimensions are puffed up still further. This myth deals with the powers of the advertising man. We are not concerned here with the advertising man of the novelist in the Sunday supplements. This apparition dresses in gray flannel suits. His diet is gin, his hobby is adultery, his vocabulary is jargon, and his intelligence, if all these things are true, is not too high. We are concerned instead with the advertising man of the new economists and such writers as Vance Packard. Here is the wastemaker, the builder of status symbols, the clever manipulator of the masses, the creator of useless desires. Here, shrouded in mystery and dealing in the devil's own secrets, is a man endowed with powers that ordinary mortals do not possess. The most enlightened people in the world jump for him like puppets on a string, for, according to this myth, he can sell anything to anybody. Since this myth can lead to costly errors, we must examine it. A complete description of it is available in any of dozens of recent books, articles, and columns, but we prefer the theories of John Kenneth Galbraith, as set down in his book The Affluent Society, published by the Houghton Mifflin Company in 1958. Here, if ever, is a singularly pure example. The picture that Mr. Galbraith paints is frightening in its horror. Society is based on a thick substratum of cement heads who do not know what they want. The manufacturers, in turn, produce what these people do not need. Madison Avenue is then called on to work its wizardry, and the public, in a hypnotic state, marches off to buy billions of dollars worth of meretricious, gaudy, and useless products. Then the cycle repeats, a classic Greek drama where men go willy-nilly to their fate. It is a picture of a paranoiac capitalism, a capitalism, as it were, gone mad. For most of these products, says Mr. Galbraith, fill no real need. They fill only an imaginary need. They are a useless and senseless outpouring. Since the demand would not exist if it were not contrived, its utility or urgency is zero. What is the function of the advertising man in all this? Mr. Galbraith spells it out exactly. Their central function is to create desires, to bring into being wants that previously did not exist. Desires, in other words, are synthesized by advertising. This is modern want creation. The public, like Pavlov's dog, will salivate on schedule when Madison Avenue rings the bell. Thus, everyone is caught up in a maelstrom of mustards and mattresses, mauve and cerise, air-conditioned, power-steered, and power-braked automobiles, packaged foods, portable iceboxes, cereals, detergents, and baby powders. Mr. Galbraith mentions, for example, a man who devised a nostrum for a non-existent need and then successfully promotes both. This interdependence between advertising and the producers, Mr. Galbraith calls the dependence effect. Thus, the production of goods creates the wants that the goods are presumed to satisfy. Once this premise has been set up, an entire corpus of subsequent ideas appears to be brilliantly illuminated. To this role of advertising, creating wants that previously did not exist, Mr. Galbraith gives academic sanction of a sort. He writes, "None of this is novel. All would be regarded as elementary by the most retarded student in the nation's most primitive school of business administration." Perhaps, however, it would have to be a most primitive business school, and the students would have to be most retarded and with a strong allergy for research as well, for none of this is remotely in accord with reality in advertising. There is no such witchcraft in advertising. Advertising men have no such Svengali power. There is not, and has never been, a man who devised a nostrum for a non-existent need, and then successfully promotes both. Advertising, in fact, has perhaps only one basic law. Countless agencies, thousands of manufacturers, and legions of bankrupts will take the stand and testify to its truth. If the product does not meet some existing desire or need of the consumer, the advertising will ultimately fail. Mr. Galbraith has his facts exactly backwards. Advertising does not synthesize desires. Desires instead synthesize advertising. The truth of this is not obvious at first glance, but bear with us while we develop it, for it is of enormous importance to the manufacturer. America today enjoys a profusion of products such as the world has never seen. Many of them are new, spectacular, dazzling, and ingenious. It is natural to assume that with them come new desires, new wants, and that these new products are, in essence, like toys to an insatiable and curious child. It is natural, too, to assume that the demand for them and the desire for them are whipped up by the vendor. But there is a gap in this thinking. New forms of transportation do not create the desire for transportation. New forms of food do not create the desire for food. New forms of shelter do not create the desire for shelter. Do not confuse a type of shoe with the desire for shoes. Do not confuse a new kind of illumination with the wish to banish the darkness. Consider, there is almost no kind of product now on the market that did not exist in more primitive form thousands of years ago. There are, of course, a few, but they represent a very thin frosting on our giant national economy. Ancient Rome, for example, had perfumes, beds, rugs, mattresses, salves, pomades, pain remedies, mouthwashes, ointments, powders, soaps, stoves, clocks, jewels, rings, lip colorings, wines, beers, kitchen utensils, razors, cold storage, baths, oils, dentifrices, and hair creams, to mention only a few. Instead of the car, the ancient Roman had the chariot. Instead of the engine, the horse. Instead of electricity, the oil lamp. Instead of the telegraph, the semaphore. Instead of the press, the copyist. Instead of the telephone, the messenger. Instead of television, the entertainers. Instead of the book, the scroll. Instead of labor-saving devices, the back muscles of a slave. But there was no Via Madisonia. It is conceivable, actually, that an intelligent Roman, walking into our affluent society, might simply find himself in a better store. What has happened, and what is happening, is a simple matter of product evolution. The Industrial Revolution with its marvelous machines has brought to the masses what used to be the possessions of a precious and privileged few, and the manufacturers seeking serious gains are engaged in making their products better and better. To assume that advertising is the cause is to state the case backwards. Advertising is only an effect, and the manufacturer who forgets this is out of touch indeed with reality. Does a man need fire? Advertising has power only when it can offer him fire in an improved form, say in a more modern stove. Does a man want transportation? Advertising has power only when it can offer him a better car. Does his head ache? Advertising has power only when it offers him remedies which can make his life more tolerable. Are his clothes dirty? Advertising has power only when it can show him easier, faster, and more civilized ways to wash. Do his wounds bleed? Advertising has power only when it can offer him better bandages. Does he shiver from cold? Advertising has power only when it can show him easier, cheaper, or more effective ways to stay warmer. Repeat purchases are the economic scale on which these mass products are weighed, and the power of the advertising man is no greater than the power of his product to survive. The phrase product evolution is not una propos. The whole concept, in a way, is straight out of Darwin. There do appear for a short while on the economic scene wild mutations in products. They are senseless and they are stupid, but such products are sooner or later doomed, like the pterodactyl, the brontosaurus, the archaeopteryx, to vanish into some economic Mesozoic shale. The manufacturer who forgets this and brings out foolish, frivolous, or unwanted products is headed for extinction, for his competitors will not forget it. At the very least, a manufacturer must match his competitors' products. If he is looking for real growth, he must excel them. John Crichton, the wise editor of Advertising Age, summed up this thesis recently in a very few words for a confused businessman. He said, "If your research and development department is only in the typewriter of some copyman, you are already lost." We begin now to approach the true role of advertising in our economy. In the next chapter, we will examine it. But first a word. Are these products really needed? Are they a strict necessity? Mr. Galbraith may well have a point here, for the answer is no. Pat Steele at Young and Rubicam put this argument as succinctly as it will ever be put. People don't really need these things. People don't really need art, music, literature, newspapers, historians, wheels, calendars, philosophy. All that people really need is a cave, a piece of meat, and possibly a fire. Thank you for watching until the end. If you want to go deep down into the rabbit hole of marketing and persuasion, click the link in the description where you will find many fundamental books about copywriting, psychology, and persuasion. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more videos like this one. See you in the next one.